Thanks a lot to UNU-WIDER for inviting me to present a little bit on, I think, the political economy also behind fiscal space for social protection. And what struck me as interesting, what came out very clearly also from the previous two presenters, is that we cannot talk about fiscal space for social protection without the why. So we've heard the why to invest in children. Clearly, there is a strong why for investing in social protection as a human right, but also it's increasingly acknowledged that social protection is a social, economic, and political necessity. And still, almost half of the world's population does not have any access to social protection. And that half that is covered often does not receive adequate benefit levels, or the protection is patchy and not comprehensive. For example, they may contribute to an old age pension system, but they may not have access to any protection in case of pregnancy, sickness, or unemployment benefits. So there is still a lot to do. And these coverage gaps correlate directly with low social protection expenditures around the world. Overall, we can observe that high-income countries tend to spend more than low-income countries, and relatedly, expenditure is low, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa or Southern Asia, and relatively higher in Europe or the Americas. And both the coverage and expenditure data that I've been presenting here are from the ILO World Social Protection Database, and the data is every 3 years summarized and presented in the flagship report, the ILO World Social Protection Report. The latest edition has come out in September 2024. Recently, the ILO also published a paper on the cost of closing this gap to provide minimum income security and access to healthcare for all of the world's population at a social protection floor level. This is estimated at 3.3% of low and middle income countries' GDP annually. For low income countries, this is considerably higher, explained partially by the low current spending and low GDP overall, as well as significant variation between countries. I don't know whether any of you have followed this debate. There's different methodologies of this costing exercise, and clearly others arrive at different figures. And if you exclude certain outliers, then this number comes down a little bit, but overall, these figures are based on ILO benchmarks. This is using the national poverty lines as the benchmark for the social protection benefits, as indicated here for unemployment, old age, maternity, disability, a child benefit, and essential health care. As we've heard also from the previous two speakers, there are a number of ways in which governments can generate fiscal space. The main instruments are taxes, reprioritizing expenditure, and also external sources such as ODA, loans, or debt restructuring. However, I think what is interesting and important to realize is that none of the ways in which we generate additional government revenues is social protection specific, with the exception of social security contributions. So while these instruments may generate additional investment, additional government revenues, they will also generate competition with other sectors for how these revenues will be used. And so, in fact, you cannot isolate this from the argument why you want to use this additional revenue for social protection. And this came out very clearly immediately after presenting the different ways of increasing fiscal space. Misello then presented what potential impact one could see if these resources are then invested into the Zambian cash transfer scheme. This doesn't mean that it is irrelevant how we generate this fiscal space, and also the session before the lunch, this discussion came out very clearly. It is important to ensure that tax regimes are progressive. Personal income or wealth taxes, as well as corporate taxes, are faring better in this regard than general consumption taxes. There was a debate in this, on this before, in the session before lunch, but overall this is the finding. VAT tends to be more regressive and other forms of taxation more progressive. But then there's also certain types of taxes, like sometimes called sin taxes, alcohol, tobacco, but also carbon emissions, that can have a double effect of increasing fiscal space, but also reducing need for social protection expenditures, for example, by improving health or reducing healthcare costs then potentially. So it is important how fiscal space is generated, but once we have additional revenues, we also need to clearly make the case for how that money should be spent and why it should be invested in social protection. Another key point about this fiscal space generation is that countries unfortunately cannot make and design their tax regimes in isolation from others. We do operate in a globalized economy, and there is a lot of pressure to lower social and environmental standards, but also corporate taxes to attract investment. And that's why international tax agreements are also important to facilitate domestic resource mobilization. So if there is an international agreement on a minimum corporate tax, this will help countries at national levels to generate fiscal space. But because of fungibility of fiscal space across sectors and of necessity political contestation around who gets what, when, and how. I mean, that's what politics is all about, right? It's important to what I call mobilize the policy space in parallel to the fiscal space. So we need clear data and evidence on the concrete social protection measures that should be financed and what the intended policies objectives are in doing so. Decision makers will not allocate the revenues mobilized to social protection without such political process. And I was very pleased also in the morning high-level panel that we had with Aruna Roy, where very strongly we saw the importance of mobilizing workers, of organizing demand for social protection, and really, I mean, seeing that this is not just a technical matter of identifying potential for fiscal space, but there are a lot of hidden interest and political movements behind making things happen. And without organizing workers, without trade unions, without strong civil society organizations, without underlying political and civil rights, it will be very hard. It's not just enough to present data and evidence. This data and evidence then needs to be taken into the political battle, so to say. There's no scarcity of evidence regarding the positive role of social protection systems for individuals. We're in a quite different spot than even 2 or 3 decades ago. Latest with like Bolsa Familia and Oportunidades in Brazil and Mexico, but also afterwards then the cash transfer project in Africa. We have a huge body of evidence now that shows the positive impact of investing in social protection on inequalities, and we saw that also in the previous presentation in Zambia, on reducing poverty. So these 2 slides show how if you look at Gini coefficient measure of inequality, countries with high social protection spending manage to reduce inequalities by 1/3. This is the example of poverty rates among single mothers dropping significantly pre and post social protection transfers. It's true across social protection expenditure. This is just an example. It's also interesting to see how this varies across countries. The extent, so there is a political element in this. The extent to which poverty can be reduced. But often these more ethical arguments about inequality and poverty still are insufficient to convince ministries of finance or even governments to invest more in social protection. But there's also a strong economic case that can be made for investing in social protection. It generates economic returns in terms of more productive and better educated, more employable and healthier workers. There's, again, a rich body of evidence showing also at the micro level, this benefits people. At the meso level, this benefits businesses and enterprises. And at the macro level, it benefits the economy as a whole. At the lowest level, cash transfers often enable people to access the labor market in the first place, because it covers the cost of seeking jobs. It improves access to healthcare. It also improves mental health, because there is reduced strain of uncertainty and of ability to cope. Also, a lot of the social determinants of ill health are addressed through social protection expenditure. For example, better housing conditions, better access to clean water sources, etc. But it also fosters risk-taking and entrepreneurship, thereby enabling, for example, farmers to invest in higher risk, higher return crops. And thereby stimulating also agricultural productivity. And at the macro level, and that was another argument that we heard also on today's morning panel, this circular argument, by investing in social protection, this stabilizes aggregate demand, and this is particularly important in times of crisis also. We see that countries that invest more and have better performing social protection systems are hit less hard by shocks, because social protection systems act as automatic stabilizers. We've heard a lot about the humanitarian response measures, but having a good social protection system in place before a crisis in and of itself is already a crisis response mechanism. There may be need for additional humanitarian aid to come in, but it is often a first line of response. Even regardless of crisis, there's a lot of recent attention to economic multipliers, both local economic multipliers, but also at the macro level. A study by Cardoso and others looking at 42 countries found that on average $1 invested in social protection returns $1.84 for the economy after 2.5 years. So there's also a powerful economic argument behind this. So just to sum up, my time is almost up. As I said, there's an abundant literature on the positive impact of social protection, both social and economic impact. In fact, there's another entire parallel session to ours that was dedicated to these social and economic effects of cash transfers. So just 3 key points. First of all, I think, as I said, it's important that fiscal space generation for social protection is by and large not sector-specific, with the exception of social security contributions. As such, resource allocation will be contested, and since all other sectors equally are trying to get their piece of the pie, social protection is often not prioritized. Governments often hesitate to make, especially rights-based commitments where entitlements are enshrined in law, because it means a very long-term commitment to a potentially large part of the government budget. So there is a strong need to really generate the political will to make the necessary investment to really ensure adequate, comprehensive social protection coverage for all members of society. We heard the example of Zambia with their national social protection policy. It is important that this vision for universal social protection is enshrined in policy documents through, ideally, a national policy dialogue where the society agrees on the social protection vision, priorities, sequencing, defining steps and milestones of how to gradually extend coverage, improve adequacy, and comprehensiveness of the social protection system through social protection policies and strategies, ideally then accompanied, as Miselo presented, by financing strategies. I've elaborated on the social and economic returns that investing in social protection can generate. And I would like to close by emphasizing once again that only by creating this policy space or political will, it will be possible to mobilize the necessary domestic resources for building social protection systems that serve the needs of the population, with all the positive effects also in terms of rebuilding the social contract, of patching up cracks in the social fabric that we are currently witnessing in many societies. Tax systems should be progressive, and public finances need to be managed efficiently so that the resources generated can then also be spent well. And certainly in the short run, not all countries will be able to build social protection systems from their domestic resources. And so there is a role for the international community to play here. This sounds like we are in difficult times with ODA actually decreasing in many countries. But still, if we look at the small share and fraction that of the overall ODA is currently committed to social protection, there still seems to be space also there to increase investment in social protection in expenditure. And with that, my time has come up. Thanks a lot.